Welcome to the Who's Left podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from the unapologetic perspective of the Hoosier left. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm recording from Bloomington. I began the Who's Left project with a Substack article titled, "We Are Here, We Exist, We Belong," wherein I invited Hoosiers from the left side of the political spectrum to come together to remind the state and the country that Indiana is not a monolith, particularly in the rural areas and small towns. So many of us red state progressives have felt alone, ignored, abandoned by the Democratic Party, left to fend for ourselves in areas deemed irredeemably conservative. But that is beginning to change. Rural progressives are having a moment. Vice President Kamala Harris's selection of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate has been a revelation to the East Coast corporate centrist pundit class who have been confused and delighted by the huntin', fishin', football coachin', piglet snugglin', car fixin', nice Midwestern dad. Like they don't know what to do with the small town social studies teacher and retired National Guardsman they can't pigeonhole as a racist, redneck, or rube. It turns out, if you look beyond one diner in Ohio, there's actually a lot of diversity out here. Walz, who served a rural district in Congress for 6 terms before handily winning the governorship twice, demonstrates to the whole country that progressive values can win in the rural Midwest. And he has shown how to effectively message against MAGA Republicans more effectively in 1 month than the national Democratic machine has proved in almost a decade now. This is a guy who, as governor, signed bills securing child tax credits and paid family leave in Minnesota. He was the first governor to codify abortion rights in the state after Dobbs. He has vocally defended trans youth, enabled undocumented immigrants to get driver's license, and legalized recreational marijuana. Walz signed bills providing free breakfast and lunch to every public grade school student, free menstrual products in school bathrooms, and free public college tuition for low-income students. A progressive wish list with a lot of check marks. And still maintains a plus 16% approval rating with Minnesotans. What does this tell us? With the right people and the right messaging, progressive values can win in the heartland. Minnesota and Indiana are very similar in terms of racial demographics and urban-rural split. In 2008, Barack Obama won 45% of rural and 46% of white working-class votes nationwide. And he won Indiana. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won only 31% of the rural vote, and 4 years later, Joe Biden only improved on that mark by 1 point. As I discussed with author David Pepper recently, the takeover of state houses nationwide by Republicans in 2010 and the resulting gerrymandering redrew political maps to such an extent that Democrats found themselves uncompetitive in countless rural districts and gave up on them, citing the waste of resources. It's inspiring to see fewer state house races in Indiana go uncontested this year. Jennifer McCormick's gubernatorial campaign is focusing on rural voters. State and local candidates are still struggling with lack of help from above, but they know how much just showing up and listening matters. My guest today is leading a group of Democratic State House candidates around southern Indiana to do just that: show up, listen, and connect with rural Hoosiers. From her campaign website, quote, Michelle Higgs is a community leader, wife, mom of 3, and a Martinsville High School alumna. Her father, Larry Burks, managed the popular Swifty gas station on Main Street in Martinsville for over 25 years. Her mother, Carol Burks, worked with Secoa, delivering meals to the elderly and infirm throughout Morgan County. She returned to Indiana in 2016 to be closer to her family and to raise her 2 youngest sons near trees and creeks and open spaces, after living and working around the world. She is a Hoosier through and through and loves country roads and the smell of spring rain and fresh cut grass. Motivated by her deep faith, she strives to build a community that honors the sacredness of all. Rooted in Hoosier hospitality, Michelle decided to run to represent the people of House District 60 because she knows that when more of us can shape the decisions that impact our lives, whether at the Statehouse or in our workplace, we all do better. But for too long, too many of her neighbors have been left out and left behind by divisive politics as usual in our state. Because so many in our community have been unheard and feel isolated, too many issues have gone unaddressed for too long. End quote. Michelle headlines the Indiana Rural Summit, in which 9 Democratic Statehouse candidates from districts representing 24% of the state across 22 counties barnstorm across southern Indiana on a 6-stop tour this August and September to connect with some of our most ignored and poorly represented voters, rallying around a unified message of hope for Hoosiers. Rural communities and small towns can have better health care, schools, and jobs. Before we turn to that conversation, please consider supporting Who's Left financially. I currently work full-time as an independent craftsman and work on this project whenever I can. There are so many more things I want to do here at Who's Left, more campaign finance research, maybe live hangouts if you're interested, a daily episode if we can get there. But I need your help. So if you can, visit scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at the paid level. For $5 a month or $50 a year, you can help me push our state in a better direction, and maybe if we reach critical mass, I can put down my tool belt and devote my full time to you, to this project, and to Indiana's future. So, if you have the means, pause right now, go to scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at the paid level. And while the best way to help this project is a financial contribution, if you can't afford it at this time, you can still help. Subscribe at the free level over on Substack. Set your favorite podcast player to auto-download new episodes of the show. Rate and review the show on whatever platform you use. This trains the algorithm to help new people find us. Follow me on social media at facebook.com/whosleft. That's HOOS left. I'm also on Blue Sky at the same handle. On Instagram, Threads, and Twitter, I'm at ScottRog78. That's SCOTTROG78. And on Mastodon at ScottRog78 at Hoosier.social. Full video episodes of the pod are available on YouTube with clips on TikTok. The handle on both of those is at Who's Left. Please subscribe on whichever platforms you use and send me a DM to discuss ideas for the project. What's going on in your corner of Indiana? But most importantly, share our message. Forward the articles to friends, family, and colleagues. Don't just like, but share on social media. Invite others to this community of Indiana leftists, liberals, and progressives. I might be the guy with the microphone, but I try to take this thing where your input leads me. So please, be generous with feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. I value it all. To those who have joined this community already, especially those paid subscribers, thank you so much. I am honored by your support. And to everybody, thanks for listening. Now, here's my interview with Michelle Higgs. Michelle Higgs, thank you so much for joining the Who's Left podcast.
Thanks so much, Scott. I'm glad to be here.
I really appreciate you joining me. So tell the people, tell the listeners and the viewers, hello, YouTube. I see both of you. Tell the people who you are, where you're from, a little bit about your life, and what led you up to throwing your hat in the ring for elected office.
Sure. So, my name's Michelle Higgs, and I'm originally from Martinsville, Indiana. My family moved to Indiana when I was 14. And after I graduated high school, I ended up going to school, performing arts school in Canada. and met my husband. After we got married, we moved back to England. He's from the UK.
Oh wow,
And then he was accepted to music school in Hollywood, California. So we moved to LA. Thought I'd only be there a couple of years and ended up being much longer. But eventually in 2016, we returned to Indiana to be near my family. And so that's kind of what brought me back here. And I wanted to really get involved in just community. When I would tell people I was coming back to Indiana and they're like, oh my gosh, what's that going to be like? I would say, it's kind of like finding that favorite pair of jeans in your closet and you put them on and you feel like you're, wow, back home. Like I love the
hmm
country roads. I love just the familiar trees and hiking and I live near Lake Lemon area, and that was always the lake that my family would come for anytime that they would have breaks in the summer. And so
yeah.
to be back kind of where I grew up, not everybody's able to do that. And so for me, it was just quite a blessing. And after getting involved, I started to get involved in community organizing. And we were focusing really on just issues that were impacting people, everyday people. And one of those issues happened to be back up in my hometown of Martinsville. It had to do with water that was essentially poisoning people, that there was some
Oh my.
illegal dumping of chemicals years ago, and it was causing a toxic plume. And at the time, people didn't know what was happening was people were experiencing cancer, rare cancers. And so one of our organizers was doing door knocking and met up with people that had actually been trying to get a Superfund site there for a while. And so that was kind of my introduction into grassroots organizing, which really is another way of saying you go and you talk to people and you listen to people. And then you find other people that share some of the same values and you work together to achieve a goal. And in this particular case, it was to go up to the Statehouse and advocate for them. And so that was kind of like my first introduction into this whole world of politics. Yeah.
Wow, that's such a interesting story. You know, you've been all over the world, and come back home to you just feel that call, that pull
Yeah.
of home, and but yet you've seen and experienced different places and seen the way they do things in other countries and other states, and you can bring that knowledge back home with you to Indiana, and I think that's so cool because there's unfortunately a lot of our talented people are headed the other way.
Yeah. I see that a lot. And I'll be honest, even when I was in high school, there was always that thing of, oh, I can't wait to leave the small town, or I can't wait to, have an adventure or whatever. Um, and I also just want to name, like, I have such great admiration for the people who stay and have deep roots here. I think that there is what is the term, wanderlust, and I think a lot of people, they have that. I know I certainly did. Um, but there's a lot of people who are committed to stay um, and invest in their town and their communities and their farms. Um, and I don't know that a lot enough is ever mentioned about that. I think we tend to admire sometimes the people that have the bigger adventures or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something to really be said for deep faithfulness to a place and a people.
There is a lot to be said of just like rolling up your sleeves and working to make your little place, your community around you better in some ways, and especially it's got to be gratifying to, like, show other get other people together and
Yeah.
uh, they learn that they have power together,
Yeah.
and that's got to be gratifying.
Yeah, we would talk about in organizing, defining power, which is actually, the ability to act, right?
Hmm.
And what actually makes power, power is organized people and organized money. And most of us, we don't have much of the organized money. Um,
Right.
but when you work with organized people and you actually start to pull things together, it is some of the most amazing experiences I've had have been in rooms of diverse groups
Hmm.
that are championing the same things, and the journey that it took for everybody to get into that room and to have the same kind of north star, uh,
Hmm.
and that's just an amazing thing to witness.
Yeah, you talk a little bit about this on your website, but how much more people have in common than we had that than we disagree over, and it's really easy to forget about that because the focus is on the conflict. The camera is pointed at everybody loves a fight. That's interesting, right? That gets the clicks, that gets the views, but it's really such a narrow subset of things that we're disagreeing over.
Yeah,
Um, Most people want clean air and water in their community. Most people want to
yeah,
be able to walk outside and feel safe, and
yeah.
that's so. Like you said, diverse rooms. That's wonderful that people can come together for those things on which we agree.
Oftentimes, we would do different exercises of just to get to know people,
Hmm.
and some of those questions could be as simple as what gives you hope, what keeps you up at night, what is something that you're deeply concerned about, what is something that you're incredibly grateful for, and it's as you start to ask people those questions and then
Yeah,
you hear those answers, it's like then your challenge is, do you sit at kind of that superficial level, because sometimes you start off with that, or do you actually ask the follow-up questions and go
yeah.
deeper and have deep curiosity?
Those are heavy questions. They don't sound like heavy questions. It's
They
sort of
know.
simple enough, but those are very very deep and complex, and rooted in uh, very intense emotion.
They are, and I think part of it though is it actually gets to the core of what it means to be human, and in the moment. And I think one of the challenges that I see happening in this political moment too is this rush to black and white, binary thinking. You've
Hmm.
got only two
Hmm.
choices, whatever that is. And the reality that we all know is that there's nuance, and um, when you when you start to think that everything is binary, I kind of chuckle, because one of the great threats on the horizon everybody talks about is, AI and the computers taking over. Well, computers speak in binary language, zeros and ones. So the more we reduce conversation into binary language, the more machine like we are. And when we can
Mm.
actually open it up into exploring the nuance of things, and how did you get to the belief that you have, why does this matter to you so strongly, chances are there is an entire life story behind that that is something that you can actually relate to. You may not relate maybe to a position somebody has, but you can relate to some part of that journey. And then that's where you can enter in and go, I've been there and this is how I've seen it as well. And when that happens, suddenly you're not talking in a debate rhetoric or any
Hmm.
divisive speech. You're actually talking as a person to a person. And I think there's a longing for that people have. And hopefully we will get back to that kind of discourse.
Yeah, well, and especially in politics and elected office, at its root, it is about serving people and serving your neighbors or serving your fellow citizens, right?
Absolutely.
And it should be about fielding their concerns and asking questions and listening and not inflicting your view on others, which I think if you recall about a dozen years ago when Richard Murdoch was running for Senate, I believe he said that he enjoys inflicting his opinion on others, and that's why he's in politics.
I think there's a lot of people that that's their reasoning, even if they don't
Yeah.
admit it, and it's sad. It shows. It shows. It's interesting because a lot of the people, when I talk with them, and they're sharing a story that's deeply impactful, 9 times out of 10, it's rooted in the fact that somebody else didn't listen. It's like, I'm sharing this to
Hmm.
you because I can't get somebody else to listen. And that speaks actually to, probably more of a systemic issue. Um, and do we have opportunities for people to actually come to the table, especially those that are more marginalized? Um, I feel like it's very easy to um, make people invisible
Yeah.
because, for various reasons. And so, yeah, there's an intentionality that has to be had to bring people to the table.
So your district is, would you say, largely rural? Martinsville is sort of in the center of your district, so
Mhm.
you do have a decent sized town right there. But is it a mostly rural district? Would you say?
I would say, yeah, mostly rural, although on the edges of it, especially over towards Johnson County, that section is not as much. One of the
Mm,
things that we talk about when we talk about gerrymandering in the state
yeah.
is the way that our districts get carved into becoming what is really artificially rural. It's very easy
Yep.
to carve out communities of interest, whether they be businesses or um, uh, smaller or larger towns or anything like that. And part of the challenge is that the way the districts get cut up, they keep different groups isolated. And like, I was
Hmm.
talking to a woman who is in the district, and she's over by Waverly area,
Yeah.
and she was saying how, she's got a child that goes to one school district over here, but she works up in Marion County, and then she pays a bill that goes down to Barkersville, but then she needs to go into Martinsville to do other things. And she goes, I'm spread out all over. And it's
Yeah.
like, where is home? And I think that actually often gets lost if you happen to live in a bigger town or city in Indiana, because it's very easy to go, oh, I go, a few blocks away is my town center, and I do everything here, and I'm part of the community this way. When you start to move further out into the rural areas, um, it's more difficult to stay connected.
Hmm.
And then when they change the lines and they layer things, so you're in a house district laid over a school district laid over a congressional district, people start to go, I don't even know
Yeah. The
who's going
the
to be
Venn
on the
diagram
ballot.
center is just like your house.
Exactly.
It's the only thing there. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And it may be wishful thinking, but sometimes I'm like, why can't we just use watersheds and school districts for our borders? It would be nice. I mean, it's like there's so many things that again, going back to schools, I'd have to say that most communities, especially rural communities, are centered around their schools. You think
Yeah.
about it, it's like, Friday nights, you're going to go to a football game. Your kids are involved in the arts or band or sports. And so uh, when when you're not part of those communities in a really visceral way, it's hard to know where you quite belong. And I think that's maybe part of the problem in we talk about that phrase, it takes a village to raise a child.
Hmm.
And I think for too many people, they're like, I don't know quite where my village is. um,
Yeah. Well, and then there's a lot of people who are like, I do not want a village. I just
I
want to
do.
be out here by myself, left alone. That's definitely
Exactly.
a thing too. But I did want to use the talking about rural schools,
Mm,
especially as a way to jump into some of the issues here, because with the Republican supermajority in Indianapolis, their policies have not been friendly to rural schools. You see a lot of attempts at consolidation.
mhm.
The charters, the vouchers, it takes money away from rural schools, and it gives this illusion of choice when, like, I don't see charters and private schools popping up like all over rural Indiana. They're in concentrated areas. It doesn't do you much good.
Yeah, it is one of those things where it's deeply disturbing when I'm seeing monies siphoned off into for-profit enterprises, especially when there is not the same accountability.
Hmm.
And then not only that, the rules that keep coming from the state, more testing on this and more things on here, they fall very heavily on the public school system, but not on the others. And so it,
Yeah,
it, it seems like we're creating two completely different pathways for education that it I mean, it creates a lot of mistrust, I think, for
yeah,
families who are invested in public school because you feel like you're being whiplashed. One moment you're doing this thing, and then, oh, now they've got another thing, and now we're going to change. And all the way through your mind, you're going, are they really, really committed to the schools in my area? Are they really, really committed to public education? Um, I don't when I hear about school choice and I know people that they have their kids in charter school and they have their kids in private school. Um, and I myself, in my own upbringing, have gone to different types of schools. So it's a
hmm,
delicate thing to say, one size fits all for education. I wouldn't want that. But what I have a hard time with, again, is when we bring a scarcity mindset into how we fund education.
yeah,
And then we layer that on with a for-profit extraction model, which happens. And I feel like that's what's going on. And particularly our rural schools are facing the brunt of it. There's there's just so many things that I question why. Like if, for example, if a public school closes, that building can be purchased for $1 and a charter school
hmm,
could move in.
hmm,
I question that. That doesn't seem right if taxpayers first invested in that
yeah,
infrastructure. And I think maybe voters need to ask more why. Why are we doing this, or why did this get done? And then hold their legislators accountable for those decisions. And I, at the end of the day, if we want a state that's competitive, if we want a state that
yeah,
actually invites people to come and stay, we have to have better education. And Um, I also just want to name as a parent, I have 3 children. I have a daughter who is almost 30. And then I have a son who will be 13 this year and another son who will be 10 this year. So my husband and I, we joke about how we have 3 children across 3 generations. It's true.
yeah,
Um, and one of the things that I see when I think about public education is what we ask of it to hold. So when we have a mandate that every child has to be educated, yes, we can have different choices of things. People could homeschool, they could charter, they could do, all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, if I as a parent go, I'm going to homeschool my child, and then I realize, you know what, this isn't working so well. So I'm going to send him to the school that's, the charter school here or the private school, and those don't work well. The mandate still remains of education. So who has to hold that container at all times is our public
hmm,
education. And I don't hear too many people talk about that. Who has to make sure that transportation is available to all children? public
Mm-hmm.
education?
Mm-hmm.
Who needs to make sure special education is provided to all who need it? Public education. And so it's one of those things where, as a taxpayer, I'm not just investing in education of my children, I'm investing in the infrastructure that is there to be maintained for everyone who needs it.
Yeah. I'm not saying Republicans in Indianapolis are trying to destroy Indiana's public schools, but if they were, the playbook would be exactly what they're doing now. I think they're setting up our public schools to fail intentionally. So they do, and or so they perform less well, and then they can say, "Hey, these schools aren't performing very well. We should take money out of them and give it to to
Hmm.
these other things, which inevitably line up with their donors' interests,
Yeah.
coincidentally, I'm sure." Or they themselves are investors in, you know, private educational firms. Todd Houston. Um, uh, so yeah, it's like they're trying to make our public schools bad so they can either profit off of it or funnel people into their particular religious worldview.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and two things. The first is, at the end of the day, and again, this is speaking specifically to rural schools, they are the heartbeat of their community.
Mm-hmm.
So if we are siphoning money to voucher schools predominantly in, the bigger cities, um, at the expense, what happens when these small towns, dry up? Uh, and it doesn't need to be that way. It shouldn't be that way. Again, when I go back to the people who have decided to stay in Indiana, um, if there's nowhere for their children to go to school, if there's nowhere for them to, the towns to invite more people to come in, um, then they're going to have to leave, and we will have lost those roots. Um, and then I feel like those areas become even more um, positioned for exploitation.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, you know what? That's a good place to get into the top issue here on your website, which
mm,
is economic stability. And, essentially we're talking about economic exploitation. So I'm sure the economy is always the top of mind issue for anybody you're talking to. I mean, that is your day to
mhm,
day life. That is, can I put food on the table and put
yeah.
gas in the car, right? So what are you hearing, and how do you plan to address those concerns?
So a lot of what I hear is around the economy. Obviously, is people are really getting hit with the higher property taxes just came out. Everybody's having issues with that, and inflation, and some of that is some national issues. We all talk quite a bit about uh, the fact that how many. You look at a town, and well, I'm going to use Martinsville as an example.
Mm,
There used to be multiple different grocery stores, and now there's Kroger and Walmart,
yep.
right? So, as a matter of fact, I was driving down 69, and Kroger has a giant billboard, and they're uh, basically touting the fact that they had donated, however many thousands, millions of pounds of food to food banks. And there was a part of me that actually got very angry about that, because I'm going, if you actually had pricings of food cheaper,
Yeah.
people could afford it. They wouldn't need the food banks. Like it, um, when you see a philanthropic philanthropic side to these corporations that give you this feeling of, oh, look, they're so generous and they're giving. It's like,
Hmm.
no, they're actually exploiting over here and making this so that you don't realize it. um, and so that troubles me. uh, but I think the thing that I'm most curious to explore, I'll be honest, from an economic side standpoint, is one of the things that we call the cliff effect, which
Hmm.
is people who are uh, usually they're low wage workers, or they could also be, say, for example, single moms that have very young children still at home.
Sure.
So these are people who are relying on food stamps, maybe housing subsidies, definitely Medicaid, things like that. And uh, when they need to uh, they want to try and develop themselves and get better jobs and whatever, all of this sudden they go from where they have subsidies for rent, subsidies for food, to it's gone.
Yeah.
And that gap is so significant, that it causes, I think, real harm to families. And I feel like, again, the Republican rhetoric around scarcity is, well, we need to get rid of any kind of assistance. We need to make it more painful for them. They need to jump through more hoops. And the way I look at it is, no, we need to reimagine how to make it so that people can, within the economy that we have, and for many, the jobs that are available, they're not high paying jobs in some of these towns.
You
So
know,
it's
those
an
all got automated away, or got
right,
shipped
right,
overseas.
right.
And by the way, let me just interject a thing here. Whenever somebody's like, the Chinese took our jobs or the Mexicans took our jobs, no one took your jobs. Your bosses shipped your jobs over there.
Yeah,
It's not, you don't want to blame the other worker. They're just trying to put food on the table.
yeah, yeah. No, and that's exactly it. And I mean, it creates a lovely narrative uh, to be mistrustful of the immigrant. But yeah, the truth of the
Hmm.
matter is the corporations know exactly what they're doing. Um, but anyway, I go back to the thing of, how do we help the families so that, there's practical ways for them to make sure that they get a livable wage, that they are able to get the benefits that they need. And so much of it starts with, how do they access healthcare? How do they access, the groceries that they need, pay the utilities? Oh my gosh, like we just had, Duke Energy is asking for a rate increase.
Hmm.
Centerpoint Energy asking for a rate increase. There are people who are presenting utility bills that are enormous, um, and that is such an exploitative thing.
Hmm.
And so these are the issues around the economy that I'm interested in. It's like, how do you stem those areas of exploitation so that people actually can, um, move forward, and then where are the places that, we can start to reimagine the jobs that are available. I know that there's a whole study around green energy and the
Hmm.
opportunities that exist if we want to invest in that. And I think while we are arguing over, climate change and is green energy the way to do it, and all of these things that I feel are, just a way to not
Yeah.
actually have a vision forward.
Well,
We
it's
then
jobs. It's
it's
building.
Yeah,
It's yeah.
they're
Like,
not, yeah, and it just doesn't make sense to me how everybody's like, we need more jobs, and then the very avenue that is showing internationally people are doing, we're still sitting here arguing over, is the climate changing?
yeah.
So so yeah. um
Well, so look, I don't want to sound like a commie or anything, but it sounds like all of these areas of the economy that we're talking about, healthcare, education, uh, housing, these are things, utilities, these are things people need, right? These are
yeah,
basic human needs, and I feel like a certain basic quality of life should be guaranteed. We have the resources to do it, and the profit motive in those sectors, especially, is it just feels icky, to use a technical
Yeah,
term.
yeah. It's did you ever play Monopoly as a kid? I'm assuming, yeah.
Oh, of
Of course, okay.
course, yeah.
So I had a friend of mine that when we would play Monopoly, he would always buy up all the railroads and the utility companies. And to me,
Hmm.
I'm like, this is a crazy strategy. Why do you do that? And yet he would almost always win. Almost always. And in the back of my mind, I when I was at the Duke Energy hearing, I was just remembering, I was like, oh yeah, he always bought up all the utilities. And we have an exploitative economy. We have equity investors buying up businesses with the express in thing of they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders.
Yep.
And there's a part of me that I'm going, when you have equity investors investing in housing, investing in utilities, investing in the things like exactly what you're talking about, the things that we need, but their fiduciary responsibility is to shareholders,
Yeah.
that has to wreak havoc on any economy.
That's why we need laws.
And exactly.
Like
And yet,
yeah.
if you've been to the State House, you will get a giant poster that has all the current legislators. Do you know what's at the very
Hmm.
top of that poster? Duke,
No,
Duke
tell me.
Energy. Duke
Oh,
Energy.
yes.
Yeah. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of those where I somebody once said they should just have the jackets that have all of the
Oh,
emblems of
yeah, that
sponsors.
was Robin Williams. Yeah, I, I,
Yeah.
I stole that for a column about a year ago. Yeah. Yeah. So what else do you hear about as you're going around your communities? Like, what are some people's primary areas of concern? I'm sure the women are not happy about the supermajorities.
Yeah,
Thoughts about
reproductive
them? Yeah.
yeah, reproductive health and abortion, that's a big one. And I think I think the thing that I really want to be naming too in the midst of that is that there are unintended consequences when we do bad legislation. And we
Hmm.
know this, but to watch a slow moving train is painful too, because everybody was saying, when you ban abortion the way we did, but you have not built an infrastructure to support even your ideology,
Yeah.
it's like the repercussions are horrible. And so we already have a health desert. But to add on to that, and I say, quite often, the hospital that my brother was born in no longer delivers babies. It is a regional cancer center. Just sit with that for a moment.
Yeah.
E- Even optically, what does that communicate about an area? And yet, there hasn't been a race to build up that uh, healthcare infrastructure.
Oh, right. It's not
We're
profitable.
It's not profitable, and as a matter of fact, we're in a situation where maternal health is on the decline. We don't have the data yet for our state, but other states it's starting to come in, and it does not look good.
Mm-mm.
And the concern that I
And we
have,
weren't starting from a great place.
we weren't, no, we weren't at all. We weren't at all. But the concern I have is that there doesn't seem to be a legislative commitment to maternal health. And I say that because I have gone to the State House and advocated for pregnant worker accommodations. And that isn't some lofty thing. It is literally, can a woman who is pregnant have an extra 15-minute break? If doctor recommended, can she sit instead of standing for 8 hours? Right? These are basic things. And to not even have the backbone to legislate that,
Yeah.
is glaring. It's glaring. And so for me, what I want is I want a state that actually values women, that puts, when we talk about um, how, why we need this kind of infrastructure, one of the images that comes to my mind is, when you're on an airplane and they say, put your mask on first and then help others,
Hmm.
right? Um, as a mom, when I'm traveling with my kids, that's almost antithetical. I almost feel like, no, 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 I want to help my kids and then me. But
Right.
that doesn't work. When we prioritize women's health and we do all that we can, that is the state that's going to thrive. That is the community that's going to be inviting, that's going to be something that is moving forward into the future. When we create punitive laws that end up, having doctors not wanting to practice here, or if
Hmm.
women go in the midst of having a miscarriage and they're trying to decide whether they could treat her or not because of wherever it is on the law, that is not sustainable.
It's like they're not actually pro life, they're just pro forced birth.
Yes, yeah, yes. And I would actually say the better term that I have heard, which at least resonated with me, was forced pregnancy.
Hmm.
Because forced pregnancy actually brings into the mindset the actual true complications that can happen. I was just talking with a group of women, and every birth story is different, every pregnancy story is different, and when you create laws, again, it's that black or white, like it's this way or it's that way, and you're legislating from a place of ideology that can be and has historically been very damaging. Um, One of
Yeah.
the things I wrote an article back in 2022, right after the legislation passed to ban abortion here, and it was I called it aspiration versus policy, and part of it was just even my own journey because I had grown up in a very pro life household and a very pro life ideology. Um, I actually would identify myself more as pro lifetime because I do not advocate for the death penalty. However,
That's what pro life started off as meaning. Like,
yes, yes,
yeah, that was the
yeah,
pro life movement came. It was the Catholic anti death penalty
yeah. So
movement, and then yeah, the
it got
term got
co-opted,
hijacked. Yeah.
co-opted. But I remember as a child when all of this sudden, abortion came into the vernacular uh, because of Reagan running.
Hmm.
And I was too young to really understand all of that. But I very much felt this complete shift within the Christian community that I belonged in, where they had been so supportive of Jimmy Carter. And then all of a sudden they dropped him and boom, now it's all Reagan. And interestingly enough, there were so many different names, including, one Phyllis Schlafly that I remember hearing as a kid,
Mm,
that now as an adult looking back and seeing even some of the names in the Heritage Foundation coming up, I'm like, oh wow. So this has been a long game. It has been a
very
long
long.
game. And I don't know that people always realize that. And for me, I grieve the fact that my faith has been co opted into single issue voting that
Hmm.
has largely silenced a huge voting block of people who would align across probably 90% of my values. But because
Yeah.
of one issue, they feel like they can't. And then what they're actually voting for is deeply harmful policies down the road. And um, the only way, that I see that changing is relationally with people. Like you have those conversations and for women, particularly sharing your journey of, why do you believe the way you do? Um, because for me, it did come from a conversation with a dear friend, and she really opened my eyes to how within even my own physical health, I realized, and this is what I write about, I realized that I had dissociated from my own health experience when it came to reproductive health
Mm.
throughout different things. It's just like for many women, it's like, oh yeah, I had this thing happen, I moved on, whatever. But when you actually sit and you look at, oh, in today's legislation, I could not have seen a doctor. In today's legislation, this would have had a different outcome. And once I was able to do that, then it was like, wow, this is hugely damaging.
Hmm.
Um, but it's a journey, and it's an honest journey that people need to take.
And it's another one of those things where it's, there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of shades of gray, there's a lot of, uh, everybody's experience is different. And yeah, this is just, it should be a thing where, like you said, all of those other issues, especially Christian issues like pro lifetime, like you said,
Yeah,
like taking care of your neighbor and stuff, like that
yeah,
Jesus guy was talking about. And yeah, so the most people are going to agree with you on that stuff, but that one issue uh is used like a cudgel, and it like that should be a small government thing, right? I mean, the government should have no business in your bedroom or in your womb.
yeah. Well, and not only that, I mean, I tell people too, neither should shareholders, because at the end of the day, we're back to medical health and insurance companies also dictating to the degree that what can happen. So there's a lot of things that we have legislatively given permission to that should never ever have happened.
uh we could do a whole episode on that alone. But what else are your potential constituents talking to you about out there?
Housing is obviously a big thing. And what was very interesting too is with younger voters, I was asking them, and again, be, because housing is such a critical issue, it's more of, do they see themselves here in 5 years? Do they
Yeah.
see themselves able to get onto the ladder of home ownership, or even staying in a community to be able to rent? Uh, some of our areas are cost prohibitive for the people who actually work in those areas. And so, for example, part of my district is in Monroe County. So there's
Hmm.
constituents in Monroe County that work for IU. And uh, if you're trying to rent a two-bedroom apartment near IU, good luck.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Right. And so then you get further and further out. Well, coming from Los Angeles, I could say, well, in LA, there's public transit, or there's, all sorts of different things. And I mean, they have their own myriad, probably a huge worse issue with housing. But you can see where public transit actually helps people who are living further away. There is no public transit for anything in District 60. That's not there. So, uh, if you don't have a car or the ability to get from one end to another, that's going to be difficult if you're trying to work and live in the same community. And again, back to speaking to Rule, when gas prices go up, it deeply affects how much people can travel. And so suddenly, living further and further out from a work center is problematic.
Yeah, yeah, it's those the same investors who are scooping up single family homes and apartments and just jacking up prices are probably also invested in the oil companies that benefit from people moving further out and having to rely on the cars all the time, but now I sound like I'm wearing a tinfoil hat. I don't know.
No, it's true. Like one of the things that I had advocated for with other groups was tenant protections, and I'm a small landlord, and so what I was seeing was there is a very symbiotic relationship between small landlords and their tenants,
Hmm.
and when you have equity investors coming in and just buying things and they don't even live in the area, whatever, it's like that relationship doesn't exist. There's not a commitment to the people who are there. As a matter of fact, now there's algorithms out there so that they know exactly how to charge what to charge rents, whether to keep a unit empty or not, so that they can make more money.
Yeah, that's
Um,
gross.
and then if you add on to sometimes you could make more money just charging fees for people to apply, never rent a thing. And so like
Yeah,
there's
man.
so many things that happen in this that again I guess I look at the legislature's role really is it's supposed to protect Hoosiers from these bad actors. And instead I feel like we have lax regulations, and the bad actors, they're looking around. If I was looking at all of our 50 states and go, ooh, who can we exploit next? You're going to go wherever you have the weakest regulations, right?
Hmm.
And Indiana just constantly seems to come up top, says, hey, let's go there.
Yeah, those
So
bad actors are also our legislature's biggest donors, right?
yeah, so
So hey, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about you got a big thing coming up. You're doing a rural
yeah.
summit. Let's talk
Oh, I'm
about that for
excited
a
to
little
talk about
bit.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I decided to throw my hat in the ring, I very quickly realized um, that it was not only just an uphill battle, but it was a very lonely, isolating uphill battle running for
Yeah.
a House district as a new candidate. And yet, I had an amazing base of people in Morgan County that were high energy, they were enthusiastic. And I also had an amazing base of people in Monroe County and an amazing base of people in Johnson County. And coming from 7 years of organizing, immediately I'm like, why don't I try to put these things together? And then I reached out to a couple of other House candidates that we shared these counties, and they came on board. And long story short, we now have 9 House candidates that cover 22 counties,
Oh wow, that's big.
which is 23% of Indiana. And we are going to be going on what we call our Indiana Rural Summit Tour throughout August and September. And if you can imagine, kind of like a band, a summer band tour, a bunch of candidates and their base going from rural district to rural district to turn out voters, to talk to people that oftentimes have never had people, definitely
Hmm.
not Democrats, coming into their areas and saying, not only are we here, but we're committed to bringing you with us and doing what it takes to break the supermajority at the Statehouse. So that's what we're doing, and I'm super excited. We will be launching on August 4th.
So you said 23% of Indiana. Is that the
Land
percent of
wise,
the pop? That's landwise. Okay.
land wise, yeah, yeah.
Still, so yeah, that's a good chunk of the state.
Yeah, well, and part of the reason why I was quite happy to name 23% is because when we're talking rural, and again, it's card rule because we don't have the population to compete with some of the other areas. And so what happens is there our voices don't get heard.
Yeah.
And we definitely don't get and because we don't get heard, so one of our big concerns is, we're wanting to have we want to see Jennifer McCormick elected governor, and Terry Gooden lieutenant governor, and Destiny Wells as attorney general. Like, but that doesn't happen when 23%
Yeah.
of our area doesn't get out to vote. And we want to see uh, Kamala Harris in the White House. Like that won't happen if we don't turn out to vote. But more importantly, any down ballot candidates, um,
Yeah.
there's not a huge number of them in some of these red districts. And so, for the few that are running for office, again, they need voters to turn out and to participate. And we just want to see an energy come back that, as Thomas Horrocks says, when
Hmm.
we turn out, we win. Um,
Yes.
One of the things that I just has really resonated with me because gerrymandering has so divided people and kept them apart. This really is our subversive way of taking that back, taking that power back under the umbrella, oddly enough, of e pluribus unum, out of many, one.
Yeah.
And so I enjoy having people chant that back. And really, it's like, you know what? We've had this since the founding of our country. Let's bring this back.
Yes. Absolutely. And I tell you, it's good to see Democrats in rural areas starting to come back some and get out that vote and just have options because yes, for so long these seats were uncompetitive. Like now, you're like your opponent this cycle, Peggy Mayfield. She's been there for like a dozen years now. What does District 60 have to show for that? You know?
Well, one of the things that I do tell people is if you were looking at uh, all the way from local government, county government, all the way up to the state, District 60 has had very substantial Republican leadership. So if those policies actually worked, you would see some significant developments in that county, in that region. The reality is people are struggling, and they have been struggling. Um, I keep saying over and over, you have to have more voices at the table. You have to have and welcome different ideas. If you do not welcome different ideas, you are stagnating. And what we are seeing is a stagnation of ideas. We are seeing a control of power that actually is eating its own tail. It's not contributing
Mm-hmm.
to the greater
Mm-hmm.
good. We don't have a commitment to the common good, so to speak. We don't have a commitment to that, and we need to come back to that.
Absolutely. So we've only got a couple minutes left here, Michelle. What did we miss? What's one more thing you want to get in before we get going?
I think I'm just trying to think. I think I want to talk a little bit about what does it mean to be a Hoosier. Uh, there is something to be said for willingly coming back at this stage in my life and saying, this is where I want to bring my young children now. This is where I want to invest my time and my imagination. And the things that I love about Indiana are so tightly interconnected around environment and around community and around people and around family. And yet, I'm looking at all of those things having been targeted and attacked and depleted. And the only way that I know that that's going to change is everybody basically says enough is enough. And they have that commitment to roll up their sleeves, get out the vote, show up, hold electeds accountable, but then also participate We need more people in local government. We
Yes.
need more people in county government. We need people on school boards who don't want to ban books, who actually want to support teachers who are the professionals that they are. We need people at every level. And the thing is if we had enough people, we could have those types of term limits where we're rotating and we're bringing in more experience, and it just we would have this robust sense of government. And again, I don't look at government as some boogeyman. Government is us. We make up
Yes.
government. And be a part of it. Don't sit on Facebook and complaining. Don't sit in, watching your news channel and yelling at the TV screen. Get involved. um, Go talk to your neighbors, and actually, um, if you are an older Hoosier, we need the wisdom of the elders right now.
Yes.
We need the stories. One of the things that I find lacking is, in the South, you have the tenacity and the stories of the civil rights movement and that long journey, right? We actually in Indiana have the stories of the Union, Eugene Debs, but we don't remember them.
Hmm.
And we need to remember our stories. When we forget who we are, we allow other people to tell us who we are. And what I see in Indiana right now, this is not who we are.
Where can the people find you and help you make Indiana what it could be?
Yes. I'm at voteformichellehiggs.com, and I would love your time, talent, and treasure, as we say. Uh, I cannot do this alone, and nor would I want to. This is not about um, individuals, and I think we are seeing that played out on a national stage.
Hmm.
Um, we need to bring everybody into um, this conversation.
Democracy.
Amen.
Good stuff. Absolutely. Michelle Higgs, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I appreciate you joining the Who's Live podcast here.
Thanks, Scott.
Once again, that was Michelle Higgs, Democrat for House District 60, and one of 9 candidates barnstorming the state with the Indiana Rural Summit. I am pulling so hard for Michelle to win. She has future party leadership written all over her, and Democrats and all Hoosiers, frankly, would benefit greatly from her presence at the Statehouse. Michelle, her Rural Summit partners, and other dirt road Democrats understand something that has eluded so many coastal liberal pundits, that Tim Walz's introduction to the national consciousness may be showing them for the first time. Citing Erica Edelson and Anthony Flacavento writing for The Nation, quote, rural America hasn't been left behind so much as it has been worn down by timber, coal, gas, copper, and other metals extracted until what's left is too expensive to reach. By companies pulling out and workers left holding the bag. By hogs, cattle, chickens, and grains produced and shipped out in abundance, with farmers getting only pennies on the dollar that consumers pay. By mid sized textile and furniture factories steadily upgrading equipment and worker skills, only to be undermined by trade policies that favor cheaper labor wherever it can be found. As rural economies imploded, Democrats and Republicans alike stood idly by. But liberals added insult to injury by looking down on the dank backwaters of rural America or glibly insisting that people abandon their communities and go where the jobs are. Rural Americans are angry because we've spent decades at jobs making homes warmer and food cheaper for our suburban and urban neighbors, only to be economically discarded and culturally vilified as racist rubes. End quote. Walz showed the way to take the air out of the MAGA movement by labeling them weird. And it sticks because it's true. The cult-like idolatry of Trump, the obsession with people's genitalia, alternate reality demons, the way J.D. Vance cosplays an Appalachian hillbilly in eyeliner, when he's really an Ivy League-educated Silicon Valley venture capitalist whose best-selling memoir drips with disdain for working-class people in his own family. Weird. It's all weird. All around. But the irrational fear and loathing many liberals feel toward rural Americans is also extremely weird. When corporations offshore jobs and leave unemployment in their wake, when a shrinking tax base slashes funding for neighborhood schools, when grocers pull out and leave dollar stores as the only food option. When these indignities are perpetuated against a minority community, we rightly see them as exploited and hung out to dry. But when this happens to rural folks, far too many Democrats, quote, believe and ultimately launder abusive accusations against an economically disadvantaged group of people that would provoke sympathy if its members had different skin color and voting habits. End quote, says Tyler Austin Harper in The Atlantic. When racists call people of color lazy and stupid, we are justifiably horrified. To then turn around and label rural folks lazy and stupid should be just as horrific. An unrestrained free market has done this to all of us. Only government, and again, government is all of us together through our representatives. Only government can muster the resources to take on corporate power. Take that message to rural America with an open mind, a kind heart, and maybe a hot dish, and we will be successful. Just don't be weird. Thank you for listening. Thanks again to my guest, Michelle Higgs. Catch her and a whole slate of Democratic candidates on the Indiana Rural Summit Tour. They'll be in Scottsburg August 15th and Edinburgh on the 29th. Corydon on September 17th, Brown County on the 20th, and Martinsville September 24th. They'll be in Martin County October 1st. Details at linktree.com/Indiana Rural Summit. Volunteer for Michelle's campaign and help her with a financial contribution at voteformichellehiggs.com. If you're still feeling generous after that, head on over to scottaaronrogers.substack.com and help me out with a paid subscription. That is where you'll find everything I publish, and you can also find me on social media at Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at HoosLeft, and on most other sites at ScottRog78. Please give me feedback, tips, ideas, concerns. My DMs are open, or email me at scottrog78@gmail.com. Forward the show to a friend and have them forward it to another friend. Let's keep building this project and a democratic Indiana, brick by brick. Until next time, this has been the Who's Left podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.